Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia, and with me is the sunshine of my professional life, Jennifer Woolman.
You really Jennifer, are trying hi. To make up for that one.
Boy,
that one word.
You call somebody vindictive jokingly in a podcast, and they don't return your call. Yeah, exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hello, everybody. We continue to tease each other about that one. I'll never let him forget it.
That's right. Well, today we have a very special topic. Go ahead and introduce a little bit of your idea for this episode.
Okay, so we've had a couple of conversations recently with different people that made us come up with this topic. And I know there's a saying, at least that I grew up with, that you don't talk about politics or religion in polite company. And I do consider our podcast to be polite and our listeners to be polite company, but we have to talk about politics because we always talk about boots on the ground. And I think what is going on in the local municipal government is extremely important and often has a huge effect on commercial real estate, the local businesses, etc. So the three conversations that made us want to address this were we did an interview recently with a small business. We had a discussion with a broker from New York City that's getting into brokerage in Florida. And then finally, we attended an awesome panel discussion. It was a spotlight series put on by the Miami Realtors, and it was with the city of South Miami. And for those of you who live in South Florida, South Miami is this wonderful little suburb that has kind of been in limbo for, I want to say, decades, based on some of the people who were in local government at the time. And now there's been a change, and you can see the progress that's happening in South Miami and the popularity of that city. So that's what kind of made me think, let's talk about the importance of boots on the ground, not from a demographic side, not from the financial, knowing what rents are, knowing what sales price per square foot are, but knowing your government officials, knowing who's in the seat who can potentially help or hurt a real estate project.
No, I think it's an important topic, and I think it's almost like the next evolution of a broker who, in their career, and an agent in their career, especially on the commercial side. But I think it is applicable, all around, more specific on commercial real estate. And I think that, when you enter into this industry, to your point, it's all about comparables and understanding a product and understanding the income approach and, how do I arrive at a valuation and a conclusion. But the next evolution is to understand where it's likely the next development going to occur. What are the indicators or the factors that are going to encourage development or that are going to, on the opposite end, limit the ability for a city to grow. And to your point, understanding how the powers or those that are in positions to influence these decisions, what is their own personal perspective? Sometimes you're dealing with municipalities that just do not want to grow. And then you have municipalities that want to grow, but they want to grow without losing the essence of the city or their town. But they understand that growth is inevitable and they want to be a part of that conversation. And sometimes you're dealing with municipalities that are all about the growth, and they ignore what made the city or the town attractive, right, to investment. So I think it's very important to understand those dynamics.
And we are getting into election season, and I just want to be clear, we're not going to be talking about any specific political party. We're not talking about any specific person. We're talking about the generalities of the office. And for those of you who have been listening for a while or who are involved with realtors, you know that our realtor PAC is one of the largest PACs in the country, Political Action Committee. And our issues are purple. We like to say we're not blue, we're not red, we're purple. All we do is support candidates who support private property rights and issues related to housing, commercial real estate, et cetera. So I just wanted to paint that picture because we're definitely not getting into partisan politics in this conversation. We just want to give examples of issues that have happened either from businesses we know or those conversations we had to bring a light to the importance of not only knowing, again, going back to our purpose, not knowing just your local numbers, but knowing your local politician, city commission, county commission, whatever it happens to be, and state government and which way they're leaning. So with that, let's get started. Do you want to give kind of an overview of the small business without getting into names or anything like that, but just kind of give an overall sample?
Absolutely. I think that, first of all, it's important to recognize that when new statutes or new guidelines or new laws are passed, that there are inevitably some unintended consequences because, you can't figure everything out from a legislative perspective, from the get-go. And that's why oftentimes when new laws are put into effect, there are often, in the following sessions, there are often fixes to that law. Right.
They tweak it.
And sometimes the people that are creating this don't have the level of expertise within that industry to understand how perhaps the way that they're thinking or what they want to affect, in regards to a change, is actually creating a bigger problem or creating more of an impediment to growth or things of that nature. So it's always important to keep that in perspective, because when you go and advocate for your project or you go and advocate for yourself, you are inevitably in a position where I believe the most efficient way is to educate, because I think most people first want to understand from your perspective, what is it that they missed? And to see where that fix could be.
And I think this just goes we're not saying that bad laws are passed on purpose necessarily. Correct. We're saying in theory, they might sound great and they're trying to tackle an issue or a problem that municipality or government official sees or is hearing from their constituents. So you always need to know why they passed a law or are thinking of passing a law or ordinance, so you can get their perspective, because their perspective matters, and then go in with why you think, based on your experience, why that's not going to work, and come in with samples for sure.
When you introduced this topic, there were so many things that came to my mind. One of them is that earlier in my career, a few years back, I was involved with a group of people that were advocating for the ability to be able to build on a lot that was vacant, that was less than 10,000 square feet, and that was close to an area of transit corridor, meaning that there was a lot of public transit, and to advocate for the ability to build there without having to build parking, because that is such an incredible cost. And the idea was that there was already a lot of incentives for you to build big projects, these 300-400 unit projects, in the area where you have the highest density in Miami, which is in downtown in Brickell, right? But there was really not a lot of incentive to basically use these small enveloped lots and be able to encourage the building of them. It took 4 years to pass a statute in the city of Miami that allowed for you to be able to build in certain areas, depending on how close you were to the transit corridor and how close you were to transit-oriented, developments and things of that nature, that you would be able to build with no parking. And the difference there is that, for example, instead of being able to build 4 units, if I don't have to build parking, now I could build 8 units. So it increases the number of units. It turns a vacant lot right? That adds no value, right, to the neighborhood. And now you're able to build, a 2-story building. You're adding housing units. And we found a way to do that and to encourage what we call infill development, right? And that seemed to be very successful. We had the first project, which was the Tesela project from Andrew Frey's company, and that kind of was the proof of concept. He was the one leading the conversation as well when we went to advocate for it. And then there were a handful of projects that came in, about 10 new projects that were developed, many of them by people that already owned the land and didn't see the viability of being able to build it, and they were able to build it. Then there was a change in leadership at the local council level, right? And overnight, in one of the meetings, at the end of the meeting, in a little hidden area of the agenda, with one signature, they basically killed that statute. So 4 years of getting it activated, seeing that there were some very positive results, and then someone came in for whatever reasons, political reasons, whatever their incentives were. Again, we're not going to speculate as to people's reasons for doing it, but we can't find any reason to do it, to get rid of it, when we're seeing so much positives in an area that was dilapidated and that needed the encouragement of growth. And so that's where it's an interesting dynamic. On the one hand, for us who are brokering the business, is you need to understand that those guidelines, when they come up, that they are going to affect the value of those lots, that they're going to provide for the ability for those units to be activated, right? So you want to be able to have that encouragement. So you want to have that, to your point about boots on the ground, is have the pulse of understanding and be able to speak to those owners. Now you own a land where you're able to do something that you wouldn't be able to do before. What do you want to do? Do you want to sell? Do you want to evaluate whether you want to do the project yourself? It makes for things for that. And then to keep your hand on the pulse when things like that change.
Right. But what's ironic, because it goes hand in hand I don't know if it was around the same time, but the county actually wanted to tax vacant land and abandoned properties and to raise money and to try to encourage the owners to build something on those lots, which in theory sounds great. Right, why do I want a dilapidated, rundown lot where people are throwing garbage and whatever? So you can understand the reasoning behind it. But the reality is the reason they're not building there is because the development doesn't pencil out.
Correct.
And nobody's in this to not make money. So unless you want to buy the property and the government builds something there, again, at taxpayers' expense, which wouldn't be very popular, they're never going to build. Correct. So how does taxing that to force somebody to build? And luckily we were able to fight that, right? We were able to explain that when we advocated against that with the county. But those issues are so...
I'm glad you brought it up, because that's the two approaches that we see. We see either an approach where people say, well, it's going to cost you not to do this. So I want you to, that's how I'm going to encourage you to do something that I want you to do, is by making it more expensive for you to not do it, right? Which never really works. Right? It never really works. The other one is to say, why don't we incentivize the ability for you to build it or for you to make the project work? And that doesn't mean that you get to just go in and say, I will only build if you're letting me go 5 stories when I can only go 3. That's not what we're talking about. Right. We're talking about a very small change that would incentivize growth and that would incentivize development. Now, I might throw the word growth, and you might, really what I'm talking about is adding more units, more housing units, which it's where we're going. We need to have more housing units. And now you don't have a vacant lot, which can attract crime. It can attract a lot of problems.
It's just plain ugly.
And it's just plain ugly, and you're also enhancing the experience and the values of every other property in that block, right? So, you brought up a very important point, which is that some people believe that by providing punitive measures, you are going to encourage people to do something with the space. That's really not the path that has ever been successful, in my view, when I'm looking at what happens not only here, but throughout the country in local municipalities. We might also want to say that we always are a big believer that local politics is the thing that people pay the least attention to, but that affects us the most.
Exactly.
Like the closer you are to home, those decisions that are made are going to have more of an impact in our life than, what happens at a national level oftentimes,
exactly.
right? And so it's important, to pay attention to that. Another example that I found, Jennifer, is not about the way that statutes are written or what you might think I'm able to do by statute, but also about the will of the people that live in the neighborhood. And I think I mentioned this, I was selling a piece of land in a neighborhood here where there wasn't the political will for them to be able to build more than what it was. They wanted it to be a residential neighborhood. And even though there was statute in the zoning code, or there was code that basically gave the zoning department the ability to say, well, there is a shopping center over there and there is an office building over here, so it's close enough where we can use this space for that reason, or a school or whatever. But sometimes you have these guidelines that are they're general or generic enough to give flexibility to those that have to actually, make those decisions. But the will of the people that live there, and we, in this instance, I got a chance to speak to the commissioner for that district. And the commissioner says, I live in the district, of course. My neighbors, there's been many people have come with proposals, and this is not something that we want.
Right.
And because my constituents don't want it, I'm not going to go against the will of my neighbors, basically, right? And so, and it's an understandable conversation, and that's what's great about our representative democracy is you get to go and ask these questions to the people that are going to make those decisions as well. And sometimes it's not just about, well, on paper it looks like I'm able to do this. It still requires an approval. Will you ever get that approval, and why or why not? And so that, again, to your point about boots on the ground and having the pulse, that's an important component. That's why when people come to us, that's the level of attention to detail and service that you want to be able to provide, and being plugged into what is happening in the ecosystem that is your hyperlocal market.
Correct. And then and we also use examples from elsewhere, right? Like I know New York has been talked about ad nauseum, and let me be clear, I love New York. I'm not a New York basher at all. I love the city. I don't think the city's going anywhere. I think it's always going to be one of the greatest cities in the world.
For sure.
But they have faced some major issues based on policies, and this is one where we were talking to that broker who's moving down from New York. I mean, he's keeping his brokerage, but he's opening up here to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming here. And he explained that in 2019, they already, they've had for the longest time, they've had rent stabilized buildings, but in 2019, they made additional changes. So the government doubled down on stabilized rents, and the landlords were now able to raise rents like they were before if you did capital improvements to the building. So they handicapped every landlord. So it was also easier, he said, to build hotels on certain commercial zoning, but now special permits are required, which has made that more challenging. So developers, for now, are leaving New York, and they're trying to find opportunities elsewhere. That doesn't mean that some developers aren't going to figure out an opportunity and a way to work within it.
Right.
It just means overall we're seeing a little bit of a shift. And I
think I forget, but he mentioned that one of his clients had moved to Philadelphia and Pennsylvania.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, and one of the things here with the fact, so you already had rent stabilized buildings, but now that you can't raise rents for capital improvements, what are your incentives to take care of the building? So now, in addition to not having creative new development, you're now getting buildings that are starting to be run down, right? Because the landlord's expenses aren't going down or staying fixed at a certain rent. So luckily that did happen here. We're a city in the state of Florida. Actually, the voters passed because, again, in theory, rent stabilization sounds great if you're a tenant who's been paying increasing rents, especially during COVID. They went up across the country astronomically. So in theory, sounds great. In actuality, very, very bad for overall rent. There isn't an economist in the world that I found yet that says that the way to control housing costs is through stabilized rents. Yeah. And we were able to get the state legislature to just ban it, right? Rent stabilization is not allowed in the state. So again, the importance of having those stories and the boots on the ground. And then the final one, which is way more local and a really, really fun story for us because it's right down the street from us. It's our neighborhood, and we know so many of the people that are involved with it, is the city of South Miami. As I mentioned, we had the Spotlight series, which is this great series that's put on by the Miami Realtors, and every month they pick a city to spotlight and they go between Miami, Broward, and maybe even Palm Beach County, because again, we consider all three of those counties the greater Miami metropolitan area. And they put one on in the city of South Miami, and they invited the local officials, and the local officials come and they talk about the developments and what's going on in their city. So we were able to have, this was an interview with Mayor Javier Fernandez and Vice Mayor Lisa Bonich, and it was so exciting to see because I love South Miami. I don't live there, but it's where I go because my area doesn't have like a walkable, historic, cute downtown, which city of South Miami does. So if I don't want to drive really far from my house, but I want to go to a restaurant or shop in a local boutique, city of South Miami is where I'm going. And I think it's super interesting that they said that's what they were encouraging, because the city of South Miami itself is small. It's only 2.5 square miles, but it's bordered by the University of Miami. And there's 2 major hospitals in there, so it's got a great employment base, but it doesn't have the density and the population for their residents to support their local businesses. So I thought that was super interesting. But within South Miami, one of the main examples of who sits on the city council and how it can stunt a city's growth was the example of when is the infamous Shops at Sunset Place, right? So this property, it's a beautiful I think it's actually almost 10 acres of land that sits on the corner of, it's surrounded by US 1 directly across from the Metro Rail. It's bordered by US 1 and by 57th Avenue, which is Red Road. One side of Red Road is South Miami. The other side of Red Road is Coral Gables. Coral Gables has been building and booming and building beautiful, vibrant buildings in the area. And South Miami is kind of stuck in the 90s. And their businesses have a ton of turnover and everything else. They don't have the stability of the businesses that are literally across the street from them. And a lot of that had to do with who was on the city commission for such a long time. I don't know if you want to go into some of your takeaways from yesterday.
No, absolutely. And, one of the things that I found really exciting by listening to Mayor Javier Fernandez and Vice Mayor Lisa Bonich is that there is intentionality about where they want the city to go and how they want the city to grow and develop. There's no putting your heads in the sand and saying, I just don't want it in my backyard. They understand that there are decisions that are made at a commission level, and particularly with the zoning, that can make development very difficult, but also can create mistakes in how a city is developed. And somebody can say that the development of Sunset Place was, perhaps not the best way to do it. I mean, I remember when it first was created, the first thing they said, there's not enough parking. The radius to get in and out was very difficult. The way that it was designed and constructed did not lead for the vibrancy that they were after. And it's obvious by economically what happened to the shops that were in there.
Well, what they did, for those of you who aren't from South Florida, is the shops tried to lock all of their traffic within this enclosed structure. So they took this 10-acre structure and built the back of it towards the neighborhood.
Correct.
And so the entrance, yes, they had a nice pedestrian street that was closed off to traffic so people could walk, but nobody from outside was going to go in. It was very uninviting because it was like, almost like we don't want you here. And the interesting thing was that Cocoa Walk, to a much lesser extent, was built around the same time. Yeah. It was also kind of a 90s thing. And in, I want to say it was 2015, but somewhere around there, Grass River Properties bought both Cocoa Walk, and then a little bit later they bought the Shops of Sunset Place. And the city of Miami, which is where Cocoa Walk was all for it. They were realizing that demographics were changing, that there was a need, that the Cocoa Walk had its heyday and it was kind of falling into disrepair. And now Cocoa Walk is 100% leased. It is beautiful. It is mixed use. They built gorgeous offices that, again, fully leased in a time when people aren't going back to office. Amazing. So we were so excited
and you
about
it in different pockets of Coconut Grove, because when you have something like that, it not only impacts Cocoa Walk, but it impacts the developments that are in the surrounding areas of the city of Coconut Grove. Yeah,
exactly. And then they tried to do something similar in the city of South Miami, and they ran into a brick wall. Yeah. I mean, literally ran into one of the outside walls of Sunset Place. And there were some issues, like even there was a union strike, and the mayor came out against the developer, pro-union, standing with the union, even though it was not that big of a deal, right? I mean, it was an issue that happened during the transfer of ownership. So it was the old owners hadn't done something. And I didn't even get into it. I was just like, what is the mayor thinking going against what could potentially be like a huge economic driver, the prior mayor? Yeah. So to see this new commission come in and realize that the amount of development that's going on in South Miami, and to your point and what they said yesterday, they're very, very intentional in what they're doing. They want to keep their local historic main downtown. They're not touching densities there, but they're bringing a little bit more density into their core downtown, and then they're trying to do a marketing campaign for the neighborhoods surrounding it, which are also very, very affluent. Pinecrest, Coral Gables, Palmetto Bay, many of which do not have, Coral Gables obviously has a very vibrant downtown, but like Pinecrest doesn't have a formal historic downtown, right? All of the commercial stuff there is mostly along US 1, same thing with Palmetto Bay. So brilliant.
Brilliant, and I wrote down a lot of notes, and some of it had to do with mindset more than anything, because I think that's where everything starts. And, the mayor spoke about what people really want out of the government is to be predictable, to get out of the way, to reduce bureaucracy. And I think the predictability factor makes me think about what you, in our conversation with this broker from New York that is moving to Miami, which is that we used to be able to build hotels in this zoning. Now it requires a special approval. Now it's no longer predictable for us. So if I'm representing a buyer, the buyer now has to take a look at the fact that this might not work. Now I have to go through another round, and the seller is not going to necessarily want to go on that ride with me. Now I have to really take a big risk to see if I'm able to develop what I'm able to develop. If not, I'm kind of stuck. So the being predictable side, I thought was very, very, very smart. The idea that you always want to integrate the aesthetics of South Miami into our cityscapes, the fact that there is a lot of work being done on the infrastructure side of things with the creation of the new pump station for the sewer lines. There's a lot of things that sometimes we don't speak about because it's not about the beauty of a place, but it is about the functionality of the place. And that mix of the aesthetics and the function have to marry, they have to work together. I love that the vice mayor spoke about that she sees forthcoming that there will be a lot more live work in the way that things are going to be developed, and really the heart within which they spoke about the city of South Miami, this idea that it's a small city with a sense of place, with its historic town center, and that they're shifting and moving with the market, but in the mindset it's not a revolution, it's an evolution. So it's going to take time, but the idea is to be able to direct everybody's attention to the same goal and to evolve as growing there. And I also thought very good for him to explain that really what do people want? They want a better amenity set, the potential to reduce their taxes, right, by increasing the tax base, and basically becoming a community of choice. And I love this sentence. I wrote it down. I quoted it because I knew it was verbatim what he says. Development that is contextually appropriate for South Miami. And I think that is where it's a sentence that says everything that we advocate for, which is let's grow intentionally. Right. And let's make sure that it is contextually appropriate with what our neighborhoods are. To our point of, we recently interviewed someone, we spoke about the value of being able to, more important to know who you are not, rather than what you are. Like, you have to know what you don't want, more importantly than what you want. And so the importance of having leaders in these positions that want to have the conversation, that want to be engaged and engage. And I thought it was great. I would also want to throw one last thing. Our chairman of the board, Gus Fonte, for the Miami Association of Realtors, was the moderator, and he asked a great question, which is, what is a hidden gem in South Miami? And our vice mayor mentioned All-America Park, and what I really loved about that story, she says that there is one constituent, there's one person that lives in South Miami that she credits with how beautiful that park is, because he is on top of them to make sure that the park is. So, this is a person that through years has been advocating for beautifying this park, and so again, it speaks to not only the value of advocacy, but that you don't need a big PAC. You don't need, if you're a resident, you have the ability to affect change. And I just thought that was a beautiful little, she didn't bring it up for that reason, but when she mentioned that, because I've met people in these neighborhoods, I've met people like that in Little Havana that are very passionate about the place that they live and work and entertain and bring their friends and grow their families, and how that passion translates to actual change that positively affects everybody.
And the fact that they have a very approachable city council. Right? So that's also the difference. I've been part of, with all of our involvement with politics, I've gone to public hearings at village councils where it's so obvious. The last thing they want to do is hear from anybody. They've made up their mind. Right. They don't care. They're going, it's their way or the highway. And it's, and it's a horrible experience. So I huge kudos, shout out to the city of South Miami and to the voters of South Miami who recognized the need for change and who are still involved with their village.
Yeah, absolutely.
So time for a fun fact?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
So mine is short and sweet. The city of South Miami incorporated in 1927 and is one of the county's oldest municipalities.
So mine is, I did a search of research articles. There are over 3,200 research articles that you can find on the connectivity between public policy and its effect on real estate. And that is how important of a topic this is, right? And I came across this article from Sweden that was, and so it just caught my attention. And how they were not only looking at examples within Sweden and within Europe, but they looked at examples in Japan and they looked at examples in Germany. And what their conclusion was is that from a national level, there wasn't a big influence, right? That they couldn't find a statistically significant influence. But when you get to the local level, right, the closer you're to home, the more of an influence it has on real estate, which is what we always say, real estate is local, right? And so, yeah.
That being said, it is an important election year. I do remember, I was too young. I wasn't in commercial real estate at the time, but I do remember a national law, and I think it was actually a tax law that was passed, I want to say sometime in the 80s, and it pretty much killed commercial real estate for I don't know how long. So yes, local is going to affect you way more than state, but there are laws out there. So please, it is our right. It is our privilege. People have died for our right to vote. Please go out and vote. Tuesday, November 5th, it's still a long way off, but be an educated, be an informed voter, and always think about how this is not just going to affect your pocketbook, but your community and where you live, work, and play. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining. And listen, vote for Between Two Chairs by listening, by putting your comments, by sending us a message, by, subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's another fun way to vote. I'll tell you what, it's all the episodes are free. I'm telling you right now.
And by the way, if you are a tenant rep, the city of South Miami is looking for small businesses, especially a microbrewery. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested and you want to connect, feel free to contact the mayor, the vice mayor, the village commission, and say you heard all about this awesome city on Between Two Chairs.
Perfectly said. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.